The weather was classic English gloom, with rain falling relentlessly. It was December 1955, and I was 14 years old, walking home from school along a quiet country lane when the rain suddenly intensified. Spotting a large corrugated metal shed nearby, I ducked inside to wait it out. After nearly 20 minutes of listening to the rain drum against the roof, my patience ran out and I decided I couldn't stay there any longer. The shed was poorly lit, but I could make out 2 bicycles resting against one wall. As I moved closer, something caught my eye: a school raincoat from Sion Convent, which was close to my home, tucked neatly into one of the bike saddlebags. Acting on impulse, I pulled it out to have a look. The coat was a pale grey waterproof, made of treated cotton, with a belt that fastened at the waist using a buckle and loops to hold it in place. It had a hood lined with maroon fabric and ties to secure it under the chin, clearly designed for heavy rain. I hesitated for a moment, knowing I should put it back, but curiosity and impatience won out. I slipped it on, buttoned it up, and tightened the belt around my waist, grinning at my own boldness. Peeking out of the shed entrance, I checked the road. No one was there. I pulled the hood over my head, tied it snugly, and stepped back into the rain to continue home. I should have remembered the old rule that trouble is easiest to avoid if you never attract attention in the first place. I hadn't gone more than a few hundred yards when I saw 4 girls coming through a nearby gate. They noticed me instantly and hurried over before I could think of an escape. In seconds, I was surrounded. 3 of them wore identical school raincoats, while the 4th had a grey coat and carried an umbrella. It was obvious they were from Sion Convent, and I knew immediately I was in serious trouble. One of the girls stepped forward, her tone sharp and accusing. She demanded to know where I'd gotten the coat, saying she'd left it in her bike saddlebag at the shed. She pointed out that they had seen me enter the shed without it and leave wearing it, adding that I walked like a boy. Her conclusion was blunt: I had taken it. Panic set in. Even though they were girls, 3 of them were taller than me, and running wasn't an option. I was completely cornered. With no believable excuse, I quietly admitted that I'd taken it, explaining weakly that I'd only wanted to keep dry and thought I could return it later. She scoffed at that explanation, saying that taking someone else's clothes wasn't borrowing, it was stealing. When I tried to protest that I hadn't meant any harm, she repeated my words sarcastically, clearly unimpressed. Glancing at the rain still pouring down, she announced that we were going inside and that her mother would decide what to do. Before I could object, they took hold of me and marched me along a side path to their house, straight into the kitchen. A middle-aged woman was sitting at the table and looked up in surprise as I was brought in. One of the girls pulled back my hood, clearly revealing my school uniform underneath the coat and leaving no doubt that I was a boy. The raincoat was draped over a chair while the girls removed their own hoods, and 2 of them guided me into a seat. The woman stood, studying me with interest, and asked what was going on. The girl who had confronted me explained confidently that they had caught me wearing her school raincoat, which she had left in her bike saddlebag at the old quarry shed. She said they had seen me take it and that, despite my excuse about the rain, she believed I had stolen it. Her mother picked up the coat, examined it briefly, and then turned to me, asking directly whether I had taken it. With 4 witnesses standing there, I couldn't deny it. I looked down and admitted quietly that I had. She paused, clearly thinking things through, and said that stealing was serious and couldn't be ignored, but she didn't want to involve the police. After a moment, she instructed me to empty my pockets and remove my blazer. Confused but compliant, I did as I was told. She checked the name tag inside my blazer and went through my wallet and school diary, making a note of the details before returning everything to me. Addressing me by name, she said she now knew where I lived and which school I attended, and told me to stay put while she phoned my mother. My stomach dropped as she left the room, the girls remaining there with me. The call took a long time, and I couldn't hear anything through the closed door. When she came back, she announced that she would take me home to speak directly with my mother. One of the girls would come along as a witness, while the others were asked to bring the bicycles inside while we were gone. I put my blazer back on as the woman collected her coat, and she escorted the girl and me to her car. I sat in the back seat, fully aware that there was no way out of what was coming. The drive to my house took barely 10 minutes. Once we arrived, I unlocked the front door and led the way inside. My mother appeared in the hallway, surprised to see us, and we all moved into the sitting room. The woman introduced herself as Margaret Bennett and introduced her daughter, and they exchanged greetings before sitting down. My mother turned to me and asked me to explain exactly what had happened, using my own words. Once again, I had no real defense. My excuse about the rain sounded hollow even to me. Honesty had always mattered to her, and I could see the disappointment in her face as I spoke. When I finished, she told me plainly that I had let her down and broken her trust. After a brief pause, she added that the matter couldn't simply be brushed aside, but that Mrs. Bennett had generously agreed not to take it further. Turning to her, Mum asked what she thought should be done next. Mrs. Bennett nodded thoughtfully. She said it sounded reasonable, but asked what sort of consequence would actually be appropriate. She paused, clearly considering it. At that moment, Patricia's face lit up and she let out a small laugh. She asked if she could make a suggestion. Her mother encouraged her to go on and asked what she was thinking. Patricia explained that they had recently studied the Mikado at school, including a song about making sure a punishment matches the wrongdoing. They'd been asked to come up with examples, and she said she had just thought of one. My mother joked that she hoped it didn't involve anything extreme, then asked Patricia to explain. Patricia replied that the offense was taking her school raincoat. When her mother agreed, Patricia continued that if I was so keen to wear it, then perhaps I should be allowed to, but with a condition. She proposed that I wear the full Scion school uniform along with the coat and be taken for a long walk through town, ideally where some people from my school might see me. She said that would make the lesson sink in. She then added another idea, reminding her mother that they were already planning a trip into town the following Saturday to buy her new school overcoat. She suggested that my mother bring me over that morning so they could dress me properly, take me shopping with them, and have me spend the entire day that way. My mother and Mrs. Bennett exchanged looks, and to my alarm, neither of them dismissed the idea. Encouraged, Patricia carried on, saying that the Scion girls were scheduled to sing on the steps of the old town hall that evening, and that I could join them for that as well before changing back into my own clothes afterward. As I listened, a sense of panic settled in. I couldn't believe the adults might actually agree to this. I looked to my mother, hoping for support, but her smile and then a quiet laugh destroyed that hope. Mrs. Bennett looked equally convinced. When Patricia finished, clearly pleased with herself, I protested desperately, saying they couldn't seriously expect me to do something so humiliating. Neither of them was swayed. Mrs. Bennett said calmly that I would get through it and that the embarrassment would be temporary. She said it was a fitting lesson and would likely stop me from doing something like that again. Turning to my mother, she asked what she thought. One look at my mum told me everything. She agreed without hesitation, saying Patricia's plan was exactly right and that the decision was final. She warned me not to argue further and reminded me that the alternative could have been much worse. Feeling trapped, I muttered that I didn't really have any say in the matter and that it felt like I was being forced into it. Mrs. Bennett responded lightly, saying she wouldn't call it that and preferred to think of it as gentle pressure. My mother ended the discussion by saying it was settled. She confirmed that she would bring me over on Saturday morning and asked whether Patricia had a Scion uniform that would fit me. Patricia smiled broadly and said that since I was a bit smaller than she was, her old uniform should work perfectly. She then asked what size shoes I wore. When my mother answered, Patricia said cheerfully that it was ideal and that she had a suitable pair of regulation junior shoes ready. I groaned quietly, my face burning as they calmly discussed the remaining details of what awaited me. Once everything was agreed upon, Patricia and her mother stood to leave, and we walked them to the front door. As they headed toward their car, Patricia turned back and laughed, telling me not to be late on Saturday. My mother chuckled as she closed the door behind them, and we went into the kitchen to start making dinner. While peeling potatoes, she remarked that Saturday would certainly be memorable for me and expressed hope that this would be the last time she'd need to correct my behavior in such a way. I couldn't argue with that. The days that followed seemed to pass quickly, and before I knew it, Saturday morning arrived. The sky was overcast but dry. Mum woke me early, clearly intent on making sure I didn't miss my appointment with the Bennetts. After a rushed breakfast, I helped tidy the kitchen, all the while watching the clock with growing anxiety as the time to leave approached. Finally, Everything was done. Mum went to the hallway and put on her beige raincoat, while I pulled on a thick jumper. Once we were ready, she opened the door and we headed out to the car. The short drive to the Bennett house passed in silence, and I felt too uneasy to speak. It seemed to take no time at all before we arrived. We went up to the front door and Mum rang the bell. After a moment, Patricia answered, smiling brightly. She was already wearing her school uniform, as she was due to sing with the school carol group later that evening. She welcomed us in, saying everything was prepared. Once inside, she took Mum's coat and hung it in the hallway before guiding us into the lounge. Mrs. Bennett stood up from her chair as we entered and greeted us cheerfully. She remarked that we'd arrived right on time and suggested getting started straight away. She added that once Daniel was changed, we could all have a cup of tea before heading out. Mum looked at me with an amused grin and agreed, saying that Patricia had assured her everything was ready. Mrs. Bennett confirmed this, smiling as she said Patricia had been preparing for hours and seemed very eager. She then led us upstairs to Patricia's bedroom. As I stepped inside, my heart skipped when I saw the familiar Scion convent school uniform laid out and ready. Mrs. Bennett paused and explained that she would rather Patricia not be present while I changed. She asked Patricia to wait outside until I was dressed, after which she could come back in. Patricia nodded and left the room, closing the door behind her. Mum helped me change, while Mrs. Bennett handed me the first pieces of the uniform. I complied quietly as they worked efficiently, clearly treating it as a practical task rather than anything else. Once I was appropriately dressed in the base layers of the uniform, Mrs. Bennett called for Patricia to return. Patricia came back in and immediately laughed, clearly pleased. She commented that it already looked amusing and said she was eager to see the final result. Her mother chuckled and told her to let them continue. Next, Mrs. Bennett helped me into the blouse, fastening it neatly and making sure it sat properly. She added the school tie, straightening the collar and adjusting the knot until it looked just right. Patricia watched closely, clearly enjoying every detail. Patricia then took charge of the gym tunic, remarking that it was her least favorite part of the uniform and that she found the situation ironic. She helped me step into it, fastening the buttons along the back, securing the belt, and tidying everything so it sat correctly. She smoothed the fabric and adjusted the pleats until the skirt hung evenly. Once that was done, she instructed me to sit down. She retrieved a pair of white socks and explained that younger students were required to wear them instead of winter tights. She pulled them on carefully and folded them down neatly. Then she added a pair of brown T-bar school shoes, fastening the buckles snugly. They fit firmly and left no doubt they were meant for junior students. Mrs. Bennett and Mum stepped back to inspect the result, but Patricia was clearly not finished. She announced that something still needed to be done about my hair and said she was pleased it was long enough to work with. Opening a drawer, she took out a brush and some white ribbons. I sighed quietly as she explained that if I was going to look the part, it should be done properly. She parted my hair carefully and gathered it into 2 sections, securing each with an elastic. She tied white ribbons into neat bows, fixing them firmly in place. When I complained that they felt tight, her mother laughed and said that was exactly how they were supposed to be and that I'd get used to it. Patricia added a couple of simple hair clips to keep everything tidy. Finally, Mum stepped forward and said they might as well finish the look properly. She combed my hair forward and trimmed my fringe neatly so it sat straight. When she stepped back, she looked me over thoughtfully and remarked that she'd often wondered what I might look like dressed this way, and now she knew. She added, with a smile, that it was surprisingly convincing. I felt my face grow warm as the others laughed lightly at her comment. After carefully adjusting the bows so they matched, Mrs. Bennett straightened them until they sat just right. She smiled with satisfaction and told me to stand up. As I did, she picked up the maroon school blazer and helped me slide my arms into the sleeves. She settled it neatly on my shoulders, tugging gently at the blouse cuffs so everything lined up properly. Stepping back, she nodded approvingly and remarked that I was now ready, adding with a grin that the overall look was very convincing. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Patricia's face lit up as she said it must be Lucy and Jane, adding that she had promised they wouldn't miss seeing this. She hurried downstairs, while the rest of us followed more slowly. When we reached the lounge, Lucy and Jane were already there, dressed in their school uniforms with their raincoats on, ready for the evening's carol singing. The instant they saw me, they broke into laughter. Lucy said the sight was unforgettable, while Jane added that I looked just like a very young junior student, especially with the ribbons in my hair and the socks and strap shoes. She told Patricia that it was a brilliant idea and joked that it must be the perfect way to teach a lesson. I felt my face burn as they talked, clearly enjoying every second. Mrs. Bennet stepped in to bring things back under control and asked who wanted a cup of tea before heading into town. Everyone agreed, and we moved into the kitchen, gathering around the table. During tea, the girls took every opportunity to make light-hearted remarks at my expense, and I sat there, cheeks warm, wishing it would all end. Once tea was finished, it was time to leave. As we stood up, Patricia stopped me and said she needed to take a few photographs first. She suggested going out into the garden. Despite my protests, I was guided outside while she fetched her camera. Lucy and Jane positioned me while Patricia took several pictures from different angles, clearly pleased with the results. She said they would be useful later, which did nothing to ease my nerves. Back inside, Patricia led us into the hallway and opened the front door, glancing at the darkening sky. She commented that we'd need our coats and slipped on her own raincoat. Turning to me, she joked that they hadn't forgotten about me and said that after they bought her new coat, I could wear the old one again. The reminder didn't make me feel any better. As Mrs. Bennet and Mum put on their coats, I hesitated, suddenly very aware that I was about to step outside dressed like this. Sensing my reluctance, Patricia and Lucy took hold of my arms, while Jane gently urged me forward, guiding me out. Mrs. Bennet laughed softly as she closed the door behind us and we walked toward Mum's car. Mum announced that she would head home now. Turning to me, she reminded me firmly to behave and to listen to Mrs. Bennet. With no room to argue, I replied quietly that I understood. Mum said goodbye to Mrs. Bennet, adding that she trusted her and the girls to make sure I remembered the lesson. Mrs. Bennet smiled and assured her that I certainly would. With a final wave, Mum drove off, leaving me behind. Looking around, I asked whether we were driving into town. Patricia replied with a mischievous grin that they had decided to take the bus instead, saying it would be far more effective that way. Mrs. Bennet added that parking was difficult on Saturday mornings anyway and suggested we start walking to the bus stop. We set off, with Jane and Lucy walking close beside me, while Patricia and Mrs. Bennet followed just behind. The walk was only a few minutes, but to me it felt endless. Dressed in the school uniform with ribbons in my hair, I wished I could disappear. When we reached the bus stop, several people were already waiting. Two younger girls noticed me almost immediately and began whispering and giggling. They recognized Patricia and her friends and quickly figured out why I was dressed the way I was. When they heard the story, they found it very amusing. One of them said it was a brilliant idea and joked that she wished she could do the same thing to her younger brother, who had been annoying her. Jane replied with a smirk that after today, something like that might be possible, and that they could talk about it later. I felt a twinge of sympathy for that unseen younger brother. When the bus pulled up, we climbed aboard and found seats together. Mrs. Bennet paid our fares, and it didn't take long before I became painfully aware that I was attracting attention. Other passengers slowly realized that I was a boy wearing a schoolgirl's uniform. Quiet laughter and whispered comments spread through the bus. I stared ahead, wishing I could vanish, unaware that this was only the start of what lay ahead. We got off in the town centre and were immediately swallowed by the busy Saturday crowds. I didn't just feel noticeable, I knew I stood out completely. Wherever we went, people stared, and remarks followed us. Whenever anyone looked at me with curiosity or a hint of sympathy, Patricia and the others were quick to explain exactly why I was dressed that way, making sure no one felt sorry for me for long. We threaded our way through the crowd and entered a school outfitter's shop. Upstairs, in the girls' uniform section, racks were filled with the familiar maroon and grey colours of Sion Convent. A young shop assistant approached us politely and greeted Mrs. Bennet, asking how she could help. Mrs. Bennet explained that she was looking for a new Sion overcoat for her daughter and asked Patricia to remove her raincoat. Patricia slipped off her mackintosh and laid it across the counter. The assistant looked Patricia over and suggested a size, handing her a coat to try. Patricia buttoned it up and studied herself in the mirror. The A-line style looked smart and grown up, a clear improvement over the awkward school raincoats the girls usually wore. The fit was perfect. Patricia smiled and asked her mother's opinion, and Mrs. Bennet agreed that it looked very smart. She told the assistant they would take it. Patricia decided to keep the new coat on while the price tag was removed. The assistant offered to pack away the old Macintosh, but Patricia shook her head and pointed at me with a grin. She said that I would be wearing it instead. The assistant looked at me more closely, then laughed when she realized I was a boy. She asked why I was dressed in a scion uniform, and Patricia quickly explained the situation. Amused, the assistant picked up the Macintosh and handed it to me, encouraging me to put it on. Quietly, I slipped my arms into the sleeves while she buttoned it right up to my neck. She pulled the belt tight around my waist and secured it neatly. Standing there, I could feel how oversized it was. Since Patricia was much taller than me, the coat hung well below my knees, and the sleeves almost swallowed my hands. I looked unmistakably like a very young schoolgirl. Lucy commented that this was exactly why they hated wearing those coats, saying they were fine for much younger girls but embarrassing once you got older, especially compared to students from other schools. The assistant smiled and remarked that with slightly longer hair, I could easily be mistaken for a scion girl at first glance, adding that clothes really could change how someone looked. Her words made my face burn with embarrassment. Once Mrs. Bennet paid for the new coat, we went back downstairs and stepped outside. Rain had begun to fall again, so we paused under an awning. Lucy and Jane pulled up their hoods and tied them under their chins. Patricia turned to me and said it was time to do the same for me. She pulled the hood up over my head and tied the tapes under my chin, but instead of a loose bow, she knotted them firmly. When I tried to loosen it, I realized I couldn't do so on my own. Patricia laughed as I struggled and stepped back to admire the result. With the hood secured so tightly, I could only peer out from underneath it, looking even more like a small schoolgirl. Jane declared that it was perfect and pointed out that I wouldn't be able to remove it. Patricia agreed, saying that I'd have to keep it on all day, which she clearly felt was part of the lesson. She then told her mother they were ready to go. Mrs. Bennet watched the scene with clear amusement, and we set off to do some window shopping. Because it was winter, the shops were heated warmly, and before long I was uncomfortably hot under the layers of uniform and the tightly fastened Macintosh hood. The girls, able to open or loosen their coats, were far more comfortable, while I could only endure it in silence. Mrs. Bennet suggested that it was time to stop for lunch, so we headed into a nearby café. As we got ready to sit down, the girls removed their coats with ease, while I fumbled awkwardly with the ties of my hood, trying desperately to free myself from it. I couldn't manage it. Looking over at Mrs. Bennet, I asked her quietly to help, explaining that I was overheating and couldn't eat properly like this. She hesitated briefly, then agreed, saying it was probably a bit much. She came over, untied the hood, and helped me out of the Macintosh, hanging it neatly over the back of my chair while the girls watched with clear disapproval. I was seated with my back against the wall, stiff and uncomfortable, facing the rest of the cafe. From a distance, we probably looked like an ordinary group, a woman out with 4 well-dressed schoolgirls. But anyone paying closer attention would quickly realize that one of those girls was actually a boy. Most of the customers were middle-aged women, and I could feel their eyes on me as they whispered among themselves. It became obvious that I was the subject of their curiosity. One woman at the table beside us leaned toward Mrs. Bennet and asked politely why a boy was dressed as a girl. By now used to such questions, Mrs. Bennet gave a brief explanation. The woman nodded thoughtfully and remarked that it was an effective way to discipline a child, especially for something like stealing. She explained that she had once been a primary school teacher and had found embarrassment far more effective than harsh punishment. With parental permission, she had occasionally required boys to attend school wearing the girls' uniform, and she claimed it had always worked the first time. Several women nearby nodded in agreement before returning to their own conversations. The girls clearly enjoyed hearing this and cast amused glances in my direction. Despite everything, lunch itself was pleasant enough, though I was frequently reminded to sit properly and eat more neatly. Once we finished, we got up to leave. This time, I managed to put my Macintosh back on by myself. Since the rain had stopped, I was allowed to keep my hood down. As we stepped back onto the street, I once again felt eyes on me. I realized that when my hood was up, I could easily pass as a girl, and when the rain started again shortly afterward, I was almost relieved to pull the hood back up along with Jane and Lucy. It gave me a small sense of comfort. After more wandering around, the girls decided to visit the museum, which featured a large collection of historical costumes. I didn't find it particularly interesting, but it did give us a break from the crowds. When we left, the girls returned to browsing the shops, and this time I was allowed to leave my Macintosh unfastened. I even began to feel somewhat included, as if the sharp edge of their teasing had softened. It crossed my mind that maybe they thought I'd had enough, but that hope didn't last long. As the shops began to close, Mrs. Bennet suggested stopping for tea before the carol singing. We found a warm, quiet cafe and sat down with hot drinks and slices of cake. While we rested, the girls explained what would happen next. Patricia told me that all I needed to do was stay close to them. The singers would be arranged in rows on the steps of the old town hall, with girls standing beside and behind me. Most of them would have their raincoat hoods up, so if I did the same, no one would notice anything unusual. She added that, as the shop assistant had pointed out earlier, my face already looked quite youthful, and she asked whether my voice had changed yet. I told her it hadn't, adding that I sang alto. Lucy grinned and said that was perfect, asking if I knew the alto parts for the carols. I replied that I did, since we'd practiced them at school. Patricia nodded and said it would be easy, then. After finishing our tea, we stepped back outside into the evening as the rain began to fall steadily again. We raised our hoods and walked along the main street toward the old town hall. When we arrived, I saw dozens of Scion girls already standing on the steps, with a nativity scene set up in front of them. I was quickly slotted into the group, with Patricia, Jane, and Lucy positioned close by. Surrounded like that, I felt oddly protected. Song sheets were handed out, and the singing began. Facing out toward the crowd, with the supervising nuns nearby, I noticed that no one paid me any special attention. Before long, I even began to find the situation slightly amusing. My voice blended in naturally with the others, and the singing felt familiar and comfortable. Now and then, Patricia or Jane would give me a playful nudge, but it felt less like teasing and more like shared amusement. For the first time that day, I could see the humor in the whole situation. There was just one unexpected complication. As we stood neatly arranged on the steps in the heavy rain, a photographer from the local newspaper suddenly appeared and began taking pictures. None of us had anticipated that. I had no choice but to keep singing while the camera flashes went off, capturing me in what felt like the most mortifying moment of my life. My heart pounded at the thought of my classmates possibly seeing those photos in print. How would I ever explain something like this? There was no turning back now, so all I could do was carry on and hope it wouldn't come to anything. The carol singing lasted about an hour, and the moment it ended, Patricia guided me straight over to where her mother was waiting. Mrs. Bennet smiled and said we had done very well, adding that I had looked especially angelic. She suggested it was time to head back, and we walked to the bus stop, where, thankfully, a bus was already there. I climbed on and sat between Patricia and her mother, keeping my hood up. Hidden beneath it, I noticed that no one on the bus paid me any attention at all. Before long, we were on our way, and within half an hour we were back at the Bennet house. Once inside, Mrs. Bennet kindly took my damp raincoat and hung it up to dry. She then turned to me and said gently that she felt I had learned my lesson. She told me to come upstairs so she could help me get changed, instructing the girls to stay downstairs and asking Patricia to put the kettle on. Upstairs, she carefully removed the ribbons from my hair and helped me with the awkward fastenings at the back of the gym tunic. Getting out of the school uniform felt like an enormous relief. Once I was back in my own clothes, I let out a long breath. She smiled and asked if I felt better. Much better, I said immediately, eager to go back downstairs. In the kitchen, Patricia had made hot chocolate for everyone. We sat around the table, and Patricia looked at me with a playful grin. She asked how I had enjoyed spending the day as a schoolgirl. I snorted and said there was no chance I'd enjoyed it, adding that I was very glad to be a boy and that I'd hate to wear a school uniform like that every weekday. I declared that I never wanted to experience anything like that again. Patricia raised an eyebrow and teased that I shouldn't be so certain. She reminded me about the photographs she'd taken earlier and said that if they ever felt like revisiting the idea, those pictures could be very persuasive. She added that they might even look interesting in a school magazine. I couldn't tell whether she was joking or not, but it soon became clear that she wasn't entirely bluffing. After that day, Patricia and her friends and I became oddly familiar with one another, and on several later occasions, they persuaded me into similar outings, always using those photos as leverage. Looking back, it all stemmed from that one foolish decision to take her raincoat in the first place. Once we finished our drinks, Mrs. Bennet said it was time to take me home. I said goodbye to the girls, extracting a promise that the following Saturday wouldn't involve anything remotely similar. Mrs. Bennet drove me back, where my mother was waiting. We sat down together, and Mrs. Bennet calmly described how the day had unfolded. When she finished, Mum turned to me and asked whether I'd learned my lesson and whether there would be any more stealing. I answered without hesitation, promising that I would never do anything like that again. And I meant it. From that day on, I kept my word. If you appreciated this story and wish to show your support, don't forget to join me on Patreon for exclusive content.